As Giles said, my name is Bryan Fisher, master beekeeper, queen breeder, do some small-scale honey production, small-scale pollination. Most of all, I like to talk about bees and to teach about bees. So many of you guys, I've been keeping bees for about 10 years. Many of you guys have been keeping bees for a lot longer than me, probably are far more experienced. What I'm here to do is share with you some observations that I have made and some swarm management practices that I have developed through those observations. Very similar to other swarm management techniques, but I take a much more natural approach. The goals are the same, to keep the bees from swarming. So during this talk, it's important that we keep in mind the different types of queens, okay? You have swarming queens, which your bees see the need for reproduction and they select, they make specialized queen cups. The queen lays an egg in there and it becomes a swarm cell for reproductive purposes. The most important thing to keep in mind about swarm queens is it was destined to be a queen from the time the egg was laid, okay? You have superseded queens, kind of the same thing, except for instead of reproducing, the bees are trying to replace their queen. But at the same time, a true superseded queen was destined to be a queen from the time the egg was laid. They can make a queen cell, the queen lays an egg in it, and they feed it royal jelly and raise a queen. So you also have emergency queens, emergency superseders, okay? That's when me, the clumsy beekeeper, squishes my queen, and they will typically start with a bit older of a larva, and it's a worker larva, so it's down in a horizontal worker cell. And they have to pull that out and make a queen cell and feed it royal jelly to make a queen. Lots of time your emergency queens are far less superior than, say, a swarm queen, a superseded queen, and in some cases a grafted queen. So the fourth type of queen, our books teach us about swarm queens, superseded queens, and emergency superseded queens. Then we have grafted queens. And what I mean by grafted queens are the queens that you commercially buy from other, a queen breeder, a queen producer, that comes to mail to you in a cage. And I've done a lot of thinking, and that grafted queen is certainly not a swarm queen. That grafted queen is certainly not a superseded queen. But she's a lot more like an emergency queen in the fact that she started off destined to be a worker. That queen breeder grafted a worker larva, put it into a queenless colony, essentially, and they built it into a queen. So, just keep the types of queens in mind as I go through this. Before I delve into it any more, we're going to talk about tomatoes for a minute, right? Who in here likes tomatoes? Right? Nice tomatoes that you can get for maybe the past couple months. It's spring here. We're starting to get tomatoes in the ground, but who likes these tomatoes that, you could go to Burger King right now and get on your burger that's white on the inside when you slice it? That has been fed chemicals to flower time of the year that would never naturally flower. That has been treated and fed chemicals to produce fruit at a time of year when it would not naturally produce fruit. To be picked before it probably should have been, put in a box, and shipped cross country to you to arrive in your supermarket. Right? Who likes tomatoes? So, my talk's about queen castles. What is a queen castle? A queen castle is a hive body, typically a deep or a medium, that has been divided into two or more sections to create small colonies, and the main purpose is, in my opinion, or what I use them for, is mating queens. So you guys can see this. It's divided into 3 sections. Each has its own lid, and each has its own entrance. This one doesn't have the holes drilled in it because I found a bunch of queen cells today on how to use the ones I had ready. But as you can see, this one has the entrances drilled in them. 3 separate entrances, 3 separate colonies, all in the same brood box. So why would you want one of these? You're not in the business to raise any queens, right? You may want one to raise some high-quality queens with very little resources and or knowledge of raising queens required, okay? Basically, you're going to use this as a mating nuke. Well, what is a mating nuke? Typically, a mating nuke is a box its sole purpose is for a virgin queen to fly and mate. When you buy a queen in a commercial situation, they typically use what we call mini mating nukes, which is a small box, very small box, takes very small frames, usually somewhere between 3 and 5 small frames, and what a queen rearing operation will do is graft queens. When they're capped queen cells, they'll go in, they'll put a couple of bees in here, a capped queen cell, wait approximately 14 days, go back, cage up that queen, and ship her to you. Hopefully she's mated. Maybe she's not. Very similar to those tomatoes that you get. Ship them anywhere in the country. The downside to these mini mating nukes, in my opinion, is that these frames are very small. If you've got a queen that's laying on this, one of the things we judge our queens by is their laying pattern, how good they lay, how tight their laying pattern is. Well, in a frame like this, she doesn't have much room to lay. So her laying pattern, more or less, is always going to look good to the guy that's pulling it, if they even let her lay any eggs before they pull her and sell her. So she doesn't have much room to lay. So it's really hard to get a proper analysis of her laying pattern. Okay? So that's a mini mating nuke. And then in a commercial situation, after the queen starts laying, or hopefully starts laying, they'll ship her off. The next day they'll come back, put another queen cell in. The process keeps going, Like I said, queen castles can be used in this very same manner. 3 individual colonies, they hold 3 deep frames that these do. You can also get them in mediums. The benefit of these, in my opinion, is while using a few resources, they use a little more than a mini mating nuke, but they take full brood frames, full-size frames. When my virgin queen goes out, mates, comes back and starts laying, I can really analyze her brood pattern on this. She's got 3 frames to lay on in here. So I can really tell how good that queen is before I ship her or put her in another box, okay? That, in my opinion, is the main benefit of having those. So, again, why would you want one? You don't raise queens, you don't intend to, right? Well, as many of you know, actually Stan and I were just having a conversation a little bit ago, a lot of the commercial raised queens that are readily available to us are of very poor quality, and I think all beekeepers can agree to some degree or another we have seen a lot of problems out of commercially raised queens. Now, why is that? Well, could be one of many reasons. Could be that much like these poor quality tomatoes that we get this time of year, these queens are being forced to breed. The bees are being forced to raise queens at a time of the year that maybe they probably normally wouldn't. These large-scale queen breeders are raising thousands and thousands of queens at a time, which would never happen in nature. Each queen is going to mate with, approximately 18 drones. So if you have a mating yard with 1,000 mating nukes in it, you're going to need 18,000 drones in the air every time those queens mate. So maybe they're not getting quality mates. These guys aren't providing enough drones, perhaps, which is going to lead to spotty brood patterns, poor brood frames, poor queens, poor colonies. And one of the main reasons that I think we're seeing very poor quality queens and commercially raised queens is a lack of genetic diversity. Throughout the past number of years, the genetic profile of honeybees has been taking a change, catering to commercial beekeepers, okay? Us beekeepers run 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 colonies, We need to buy queens. These commercial operations run 1,000, 10,000, 20,000 colonies. They have to buy queens. So these queen breeders are catering to the commercial bee operation. What happens in February that has the highest demand for honeybees in the U.S.? Almond pollination, right? All these guys need queens. All these guys need boxes with, 6, 8 frames of brood in them to classify as a pollination colony. What bees do you know have 6, 8 frames of brood in them the first and second week of February, right? So over time, the genetic profile of the bees has been changed to cater to the commercial beekeepers so they can get bees that build up in February. Get bees that build up maybe in a time of year that they probably shouldn't in nature, probably wouldn't in nature. to make it easier on the beekeeper, to make it easier on the almond growers, so they get their pollination. So, and you also have a lack of genetic diversity because all these commercial queen breeders are getting instrumentally inseminated breeder queens from just a handful of people that are actually inseminating queens across the U.S. So therefore, pretty much a large percentage of this commercially raised queens are coming from a very small amount of genetic diversity. They're all coming from the same place, essentially. This said, no matter how perfect you raise queens, on what size level, there always are going to be some duds, even if the bees raise them themselves, right? We've all had that hive that swarmed, and for some reason that swarm queen never took. A jaybird ate her on her mating flight. Something happened. There always can be a dud. So that's just breeding in general. So again, why would you want one of these, right? We've been talking about commercially raised queens and their use in a commercial atmosphere as far as a mating nuke, something like that. Most of you guys probably are not going to ever graft queens. So let's talk about tomatoes again real quick. Who likes tomatoes, right? Who likes tomatoes? Maybe you had a garden last year and you had put up all the tomatoes you wanted to can for the year, right? You had a couple of tomato vines out there. Maybe they were heirloom organics. Maybe they were your great-grandpa's tomatoes. You've been planting them every year. You left a couple tomatoes hanging out there on that vine last August. You go out there this spring, you work your garden up sprouts a volunteer tomato, right? All you have to do is go out there, maybe pull some weeds around it, and stake it up. Then what you get in late summer is this tomato that came out of your garden, that when you slice it is red and juicy and tastes like it came right out of your backyard, right? Now, who likes those type of tomatoes? Right? I think we can agree on that. There's a huge difference. What's that? I did not. They're not ready yet. If I had tomatoes now, they'd be forced to produce at the wrong time of year. So, remember the different type of queens. We have queens that the bees select at the proper time, that are destined to be queens from the time the egg is laid. And then we have queens that us beekeepers want queens when we want them, so we go and transfer a worker larva into a really strong colony and force them to raise queens, oftentimes at an inappropriate time of the year. Swarm queens, destined to be queens from day one, the time that egg is laid. Okay? We all know when bees, this time of year, for the past month or two, the bees start building these queen cups in anticipation of swarming. The difference in that queen cup and a worker cell in your hive is it's one of the differences is that's a round cell. Your workers are raised in hexagon cells. The queen cups are round. They're also vertical. The worker cells are on the horizontal plane. And as we all know, when the queen lays an egg, whether it be or in a worker cell or a drone cell, it stands up, straight up, and then it lays down, and then it hatches into a larva. It's fed royal jelly for the first few days, and then switched over to bee bread. Oftentimes, in a swarming situation, these queens build these queen cups on the bottoms of these frames. They polish them. They'll sometimes even put a little royal jelly in them before the queen lays. That egg stays vertical. It doesn't lay down on its side and hatch to become a larva. It stays vertical, hatches, and is swimming in a pool of royal jelly. It was destined to be a queen from day one. Right? So, we're going to talk about how we can use these queen castles to let a few of these swarm queens volunteer themselves. So all we have to do is stake them up, just like that tomato. Okay? As beekeepers in the spring, it seems like we constantly fight swarms, right? We were all taught swarms are bad. You don't want your bees to swarm. So why don't we want our bees to swarm? We all know if your bees swarm, there goes your foragers. There goes your honey crop that year in the top of that tree, right? But as beginner beekeepers, we're also taught, to fight these swarms. Well, how do you prevent them? You put a young queen in there. Young queens don't want to swarm, You put your young queen in there, you make your honey crop, you go in there every 7 to 10 days, you cut your queen cells to prevent that swarm from happening, from ever issuing. And then you make your honey crop, you pull all your honey supers off, you treat that hive for mites, right? That's what we're told to do. Treat that hive for mites. And then you feed them back up if you need to, get them ready for winter, fall. So worried about this hive losing a little honey production because of that swarm. Because it's not good for us as beekeepers. We don't want to lose that honey. But let's think about what a swarm does for the bees, okay? When the bees swarm, they raise a queen. They're replacing their queen with a nice young queen that you don't have to spend $20 on, right? They're breaking their brood cycle. Well, the mites reproduce in brood. We're always told one of the ways to treat your mites, non-chemically treatment of mites, is breaking your brood cycle. Bees are doing that for you when they swarm. But you're too selfish. You want their honey. We all do. That's why we're beekeepers. We want the honey. So maybe swarming isn't so bad for the bees. In fact, maybe it's very, very good for the bees. Maybe swarming is just bad for us, right? Maybe the benefits that swarming has on the overall colony is often overlooked by us beekeepers because of our greed, right? We constantly fighting swarms, So, once again, the main thing about these swarm queens that we cut out of here every 7 to 10 days, destined to be a queen from day one. Very important. Raised in a vertical cell, not horizontal. Different forces are on that queen from the orientation of her in that hive, per se. Forces that cannot perhaps be explained by myself, but forces are there. Gravity, forces that cannot be explained so easily. Gravity, magnetism. They're there. But even if you don't believe in that, it's still look at it as a queen that was destined to be a queen from day, an egg that was destined to be a queen from day one. So, that's where my queen castles come in. So I'm working my hives. I come across this hive, early in the spring. It's overwintered well. I'm working my parent colony. It overwintered well. It made me 5 supers of honey last year. So not only did it overwinter, it did good last year. Every time I sugar rolled it or did a sticky board, mite counts were low, right? I come across this hive in the spring, it's got a bunch of queen cells in it. It's boiling over with bees, it's going to swarm, right? So, what can you do to help prevent that? You can do all the things we talked about. You can split it, which is going to hurt your honey production. You can cut the queen cells out, which you're going to have to do every 7 to 10 days. You can do all these things, but oftentimes they still swarm, no matter what we do. So when I'm working that parent colony, the one that was very prolific last year, I'll go in there, I'll find all these queen cells. First thing I'll do is I'll grab me a nuke box. 5-frame nuke. I'll find my queen, I'll take her out 2 or 3 frames of brood. And the bees that are on those frames. So what I've done is created an artificial swarm. When the bees swarm, the old queen leaves with 70% or so of the foragers, and they find a new home, they raise a new queen. So I remove that old queen, create what I call an artificial swarm. The bees think they have already swarmed. And then I'll go through that colony and remove all but 2 queen cells in that parent colony. Now I'm going to leave those 2 queen cells because they were eggs that were destined to be queens from day one. They're still in that colony. They're genetics. They're going to raise them up. Those queens are going to emerge. They're going to mate. They're going to come back, start laying eggs. What I will do with the other frames in that colony is I'll go through them, and if there's a whole bunch of queen cells, I'll find the queen cells, and I'll take a pocket knife, and I'll cut them off. I don't want to take too many frames out of this colony. My whole purpose is making honey on this colony, but preventing the swarm. So I've taken the old queen, made an artificial swarm. I still may have 20 queen cells in here. So I'll go through there with a sharp knife, and I will take frames of open brood from another colony and cut those queen cells out, and then just stick them right onto a frame of open brood from any colony. And I can stick them right in this queen castle, right? So now, what I'm left with is I will have a parent colony with 2 queen cells in it. I've removed the other queen cells and stuck them to frames of open brood and put them in these queen castles. 1 queen cell per division. And then I have an artificial swarm in a nuke box with a few frames of brood and my parent queen, okay? So what's going to happen to my parent colony? Like I said, that queen's going to emerge, she's going to fly, she's going to mate. And where this difference than a lot of the other swarm prevention techniques is you are going to lose some honey production for 5 or 6 days. You know, there's a bunch of open brood in that colony that needs nurse bees, right? That open brood has to get fed constantly by these nurse bees. Well, after 5 days, all that open brood is going to be kept. So you're going to have 10 or 15,000 nurse bees in there. They're out of a job. They're not going to go wait in the unemployment line. They're going to go hit the woods and start making. Oops. They're going to go, oh, is that, yeah. They're going to go hit the woods and start making nectar. So, what your honey production will do is it's going to flatline after you take that queen out, the mother queen. It's going to flatline for a few days because those nurse bees are still needed. But as those larvae are getting capped, there's no more need for nurse bees. So all those bees, like I said, will just go out and start foraging honey. So after about 4 or 5 days, your hive will actually produce as close to as much honey and possibly even more because you have no need for all those nurse bees. That if there was a queen in there laying eggs every day, that number of nurse bees would never change. They would always be there taking care of that brood. But what else you have? So you have your parent colony with 2 queen cells in it. It's still going to probably make you a honey crop. But you also have a nuke with the mother queen that did so great last year sitting there that you can build out, you know. But then again, you've got all these 3 queen cells in this box. They're going to hatch out and emerge and become queens. You can grow them out into splits and say you've done all this and we happen to get a late freeze and you don't make 0 honey. Well, my friends, you can sell 10 hives of bees legally in North Carolina without any kind of inspection. And right now, out of this one hive that was probably going to swarm and lose your honey production, you potentially have made a honey crop and have 4 splits that you can sell for $150 a piece because they're localized genetics. You raised those bees off a hive that was prolific last year, that survived in Concord, North Carolina, that made honey, that had low mite counts, that came through winter with good honey stores. You didn't have to feed them tons of pollen and fondant and everything else to get them through winter. They were thrifty. So what you have is survivor bees from a mother that has went out and mated with other drones that have survived winter in this area because they're flying in early spring. If they didn't survive, they wouldn't be here in early spring in the area. So, and then your parent colony has the 2 queen cells in it. What happens if one of those fell? You have 4 nukes. Combine them back in there with a laying queen. You know, you've got the mother queen you can combine in. And you've got 3 nukes here that'll have a laying queen within a few weeks. So if they happen to go queenless, one of those happens to not fly and mate properly, you've got resources to combine in there and get them queen right again. If they are queen right, you know, you've got these to sell, like I said. And really, so what if one of these doesn't make? Go out, fly, and mate, you know? They have these division boards in here that you can slide out and make it a 6-frame colony. So if one, for some reason, doesn't make it, but the other 2 do, you can slide it out and make it a 6-frame nuke. It's that easy. So, and the main thing is you haven't affected your honey production in your parent colony as much as you would have making a split, and you've relieved the congestion in the brood nest by removing a few frames and allowed them to raise that locally raised swarm queen that was destined to be a queen from day one. They've broken the brood cycle, which has broken your varroa mite cycle, requeened their hive. So essentially, the money or the honey that you lost, the honey sales that you lost by those 5 days, you've saved by not having to buy a queen or requeen it because they've done that for you. You've saved by not having to buy chemicals to treat your mites in the spring because they've done it for you. And you've got localized queens in your hive. So when you find some queen cells in there, instead of cutting them out, stake them up. Cut them out, stake them to a brood frame. Put them in your hive. Let them volunteer themselves to be probably some of the most high-quality queens you've had because they were destined to be a queen from the time the egg was laid. So my queen castles, you'll notice that I have them painted. Different colors. All 3 sides are different colors. They have 3 entrances that are different shapes on each one of them. I have a circle. I have a triangle. And then on the back here, I have a square. I messed up when I was drilling that. Put my square in the wrong place. And all my hives are different. All my colors and shape are My shapes are the same, but my colors are all different on all of them. And as we know, bees can see 4 or 5 different colors, 4 or 5 different shapes. Three different shapes: the triangle, the circle, and the square. So, to avoid confusion of my queens when they come back to their hive, that's why they're the different colors. It's more easy for them to identify where they actually came from. And then I use 16-ounce drink bottles with 2 or 3 holes. I use a frame nail, one of the small frame nails, to poke these holes in the bottle lid, and that's my feeder. They stick right in a hole on the top. And I fill it up with really light sugar syrup. And then for ventilation / drainage, I have a 1 1/8-inch hole drilled into the bottom of them with hardware cloth, number 8 hardware cloth on each side. That allows for any moisture that comes in here. I don't run any type of telescoping top on them. Mine's set in my mating yards just like this. And that hole in the bottom will allow any drainage of any water that happens to get in there, or if my syrup bottles leak. So, like I said, take the opportunity to let some queens volunteer themselves for you, and you'll probably be very surprised with the results you get. It's not that hard. All you have to do is stake them up. One of these boxes, probably, I think, $30-40 from somewhere like Brushy Mountain. Cost of 1 queen, $20 plus shipping. So essentially, for the cost of 1 queen plus shipping, you can get one of these and raise yourself 3 queens at a time in it. So really not that expensive either.